For this video today, I'm just sharing this quick document I made, which is the I Ching physiognomy for the cast of the show Andor, which I had a request to do, and also other requests just to explain more about kind of dynamic archetype relationships in stories, whether it's real or fictional stories. And because the face can be translated to the serial code of the I Ching, you're able to get a read on the situation, the personality, the story, the sense of change that goes on through these people's lives. Whether, again, real or fictional, the face expresses or mimics these emotions, and those emotions are equatable to the hexagrams of the I Ching, which is an ancient Chinese oracle that gives information on a situation, on change, the flow of energy. Because every story is ultimately about light or fire or energy or electricity in some form, and that form exists through people, places, events. It's just this transfer of light and this interaction of energy. And these take archetypal forms, and they take archetypal forms through people and through their faces. You can kind of read them. I'll link the document because it's, if you're familiar with the show or with the I Ching, it's easier to just read it. And if you're not familiar with either, it wouldn't really make any sense if I just read it. But I will talk about some of the nuance and some of the just sense of reading archetypes through this method. Because again, you could use any method and arrive to similar conclusions. It's almost like how you have the anatomic view of the body. You have some that are just showing you the muscles, some are just showing you the bones, some are showing you the nervous system. Different archetypes, whether it's divinatory or more psychological, or even just kind of like job or role based, they give you different views like that of a story. So the I Ching is kind of like the DNA view. It's the ingredients or the recipe list that you mix together, and that's what you get. So it kind of just shows you the underlying currents of energy. That's what the I Ching does. You might say astrology shows you the nervous system of a story. You might say that enneagrams show you the musculature of a story or of people, and so on. I have not seen this show before, and all the information I had was just basic. This is the main character, this is the villain, and a picture of their face. Now, people have multiple expressions that they make. They will go through, or they could go through a dozen. In the context of a show, you might see them have all different kinds of emotions. Some characters will literally only have one facial expression that you'll ever see. Some have a ton. And so the more you watch a show, the more you can read these different expressions within different situations and understand that character more. If you think of just the sort of poster image of a character, that's most likely going to be their main emotional type. This is the emotional type that's kind of the core of who they are, what they represent in the show. So that's what I'm reading in this example, in this show, Andor. And I don't really know the plot of it other than what I was able to figure out from just reading the archetypes and knowing whose role is what. I can get an understanding of what's going on. While the I Ching itself is incredibly accurate, where there may be inaccuracies is if you misinterpret some of the facial expressions, or you just get the wrong read is the only time it'll kind of be wrong. And usually when that happens in a show, either they did really bad job casting a character, or they had plans to use the character in some way and it kind of got written off, or they weren't able to do it. So if you have someone who is expressing a certain kind of archetype and never really acts in a way that fits that facial expression, that emotional type, there's going to be a disconnect with the audience or with the character in that world. They're going to lose credibility with them being like a realistic or relatable, or just a character that you can understand their motivations. And so if some of these archetypes are ultimately wrong, it could be that it hasn't happened yet in the story, or they kind of got written off in a way that didn't allow them to use that character in the way that they were supposed to, or the way they had intended to, based off of the casting choice. But let's say you've only seen one episode and you read all their archetypes, you will know a lot of what is going to happen in the story. For example, if we take the space villain who's kind of got this archetype of a volcanic fury, or an avenging volcanic goddess who just wants to destroy everything. If you watch the first episode and this character isn't doing anything like that at all, you will know through that archetype that either somewhere in the past that the narrative hasn't revealed yet, they have done that, or somewhere upcoming in a few episodes or seasons, they're going to end up being like that. Whether it's literally fire and brimstone, scorched earth, or it's just like metaphorically burning bridges or torching everything. So that's some of the way that it's predictive. Whether you've never seen it or you're seeing some of it and you see a character and they have this archetype of something and they just haven't fulfilled it in some way or haven't acted through that archetype, you know that it's probably coming or that has something to do with their past. If the character doesn't turn out to be an interesting character or not well done, it's usually because they probably had plans for that and they just didn't do it. What's more important to a story than budget and even the story itself is if the characters are credible in their archetype. I'm not a huge fan of Star Wars, but I know from the old movies that they have iconic characters, they have iconic archetypes. Even if the story isn't very good, they do a good job making those characters believable and relatable and credible. And that's the more important part of storytelling, is it's the mythological romance of all of these different archetypes. It's the story of how these are interacting, because that's the part that people care about more than the overall structure of the story. I would say for the most part anyways. Characters that are really hard to read, they will tend to have kind of more ambiguous looking facial expressions, or they go through a lot of facial expressions. And those kinds of characters are more than likely going to be ones who are conflicted in what their role is supposed to be, how they're supposed to be, which faction to join, whether to walk away from everything, whether to join this, do that. So you could read multiple archetypes and then kind of get an understanding of that, of their conflicting ideas or their conflicting emotions about the different situations. Some people will look very much like these caricatures where they're like dead set in one single emotional type, and that is usually more obviously that they're that archetype, and they're really like full on 100% that archetype and have been for most of their life or for a very long period of time, or just feel that strongly about that situation because the emotions, the face mimics the situation, the energy that you are experiencing or going through, or your view of the world. It's a lot of things at once, because the face is kind of this matrix or this interface of your internal and external relationship in what's going on around you, what your life is at, where things are happening, how change is going on, which is the flow of energy, which is why it's called the Book of Changes, or the I Ching. Again, with certain characters, the less obvious their emotional type is, the more conflicted they're probably going to be, because they're going to have multiple archetypes. And especially for this character, I could see that there were probably multiple. I settled with this one because it seems to characterize what his ultimate role and decision was going to be, even though there's probably multiple that he was expressing that were important to his character. So you could have done 3 or 4 I Ching archetypes and then settled on which one was probably going to be the one that he does versus one that was maybe more relevant to what he wants to do. It just depends on the complexity of the story and the character. I think the last character I wanted to bring up specifically was Rebel Spy, Vidar, because the mythological role of Vidar is interesting. He's a Norse god who is very spatial. He's pretty much described as his foot and arm in specific positions holding the mouth of a dragon or the jaws of a beast. And so in the I Ching, this archetype is that. It's being in the jaws of the lion or the belly of the beast. That face expresses that situation, that you're in kind of enemy territory and you have a duty to hold that open, hold the jaws open, or fight off that beast. Very similar to the story of Jonah, the prophet who had moments of doubt, ended up in the body or the belly of the Leviathan, and then came to some kind of conclusion. So this character more than likely will have a moment of trying to leave or give up their duty, and then something will pull them back into it, or they'll decide that they need to complete their duty and probably die in the process of it, but doing some important role in helping the faction she's a part of. And so yeah, that's kind of just a rundown. Like I said, just read through it if you're interested in the show or the I Ching as just an example of reading different archetypes. And seeing this just as an example, I would not mind doing shows or requests for the cast of shows. I haven't seen most shows, so it, in my opinion, makes it more interesting to just see the archetypes in their role, kind of just like that DNA of a story without actually knowing the story or without knowing very much about the story. But that's just it for the video. You can check the link out again. Thanks for watching.